The bill settled on the table like a death sentence. A single, brutal slash of black ink cut through the tip line. 0. A cavernous, echoing 0. Across the dining room of Aurelia, the city's most ostentatious temple of gastronomy, a few of the other servers caught the gesture as the billionaire slid out of the booth. Smirks flickered in the candlelight. Clara, a single mother whose hope for the week had been pinned to this one table, was left with nothing but the ghost of his expensive cologne and a mess of dirty dishes. Clara felt the familiar burn behind her eyes, the sting of tears she refused to shed. That tip wasn't for a new pair of shoes or a night out. It was for Sunstone Meadows. It was for the deposit on the only memory care facility in the state that didn't smell of despair, the only place that might give her mother, Eleanor, a sliver of the dignity that dementia was stealing from her day by day. But as Clara's hand, trembling with a quiet rage, moved to snatch the heavy porcelain plate, her fingers brushed against something crisp and flat tucked beneath its rim. It wasn't cash. It was a folded piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. On it, a short, handwritten note contained a challenge that would detonate her world. And the man who left it? He wasn't just another callous tycoon. He was an architect of ruin and redemption, and this was his final, most unforgiving test. The dinner service at Aurelia was less a culinary experience and more a high-stakes performance. Clara wiped a stray bead of sweat from her temple with the back of her wrist, a practiced move that wouldn't smudge the minimal mandatory makeup. The soles of her feet, encased in department store black flats that were supposed to be comfort fit, screamed with a dull, persistent agony. It was a pain that had become the background music of her life, a constant reminder of the 9-hour shifts that still weren't enough. "Table 4 needs their check, Clara." "Now," hissed Mr. Davies, the restaurant manager. Davies was a man who seemed permanently hunched, as if ducking from a blow that had landed years ago and never quite faded. He ruled his small kingdom with a mixture of passive aggression and petty tyranny, and he particularly disliked Clara. She was efficient, quiet, and never stayed for the after-shift drinks, where the real sucking up happened. She had to race to catch the 11:42 p.m. bus to relieve the night nurse watching her mother. "Right away, Mr. Davies," Clara said, her voice a smooth, professional veneer over a core of exhaustion. She moved toward the POS station, her mind drifting to the brochure tucked into her purse. It was from Sunstone Meadows, its glossy pages showing smiling seniors painting watercolors in a sun-drenched garden. The price tag for that sunlight was astronomical. She needed to come up with a $5,000 deposit by the end of the month. Today was the 15th. Her tip jar for the month held just over $600. "Don't look now, but your nightmare just walked in," Tiffany whispered, sidling up to her. Tiffany was a decade younger than Clara's 28 years, with a metabolism that defied the laws of physics and a casual cruelty she mistook for wit. She was Davies's favorite, a master of the flirtatious laugh that magically tripled her tips. "The VIP booth in the back." Clara glanced toward the secluded alcove, shrouded in dark velvet. "Who is it?" "Julian Croft," Tiffany said, a smirk playing on her perfectly glossed lips. The name hung in the air, heavy with the weight of skyscrapers and stock market takeovers. Croft was a legend in the city, a real estate magnate who had reshaped the skyline. They called him the Architect in the financial pages, a man known for his visionary designs and his brutalist approach to business. "So why aren't you taking him?" Clara asked, instantly suspicious. Tiffany fought for the high roller tables like a shark sensing blood. A tip from a man like Croft could be the entire deposit for Sunstone Meadows. Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh. "Are you new here?" I served him once. Once. He sent back a bottle of wine because he claimed the vintage was a quarter point off its peak. He asked me to name the specific farm the microgreens in his salad came from. He doesn't tip, honey. He interrogates. He dissects. It's not a dinner, it's an audit. I've got that table of software guys celebrating their IPO. They're already 3 sheets to the wind and ordering the expensive scotch. Easy money. She pressed a heavy, leather-bound menu into Clara's hands. You can have the architect. Consider it a character-building exercise. Clara watched her sashay away. She knew she couldn't refuse. Davies would see it as insubordination. And she couldn't afford to lose this job, not with Eleanor's condition worsening, her moments of lucidity becoming rarer, more precious jewels in a fog of confusion. Taking a slow, steadying breath, she smoothed the front of her apron, a pointless gesture of composure, and walked toward the velvet cage where the lion waited. Julian Croft wasn't looking at his phone. He was studying the architecture of the restaurant itself, his gaze tracing the lines of the vaulted ceiling. His face, illuminated by the soft glow of the table lamp, was all sharp angles and severe intelligence. He wore a dark grey suit that was a masterpiece of understated tailoring, its cost likely equivalent to her annual salary. His hair was dark, flecked with silver at the temples, and when his eyes finally met hers, they were a startling shade of cobalt blue. They were the eyes of a builder, a man who saw the world not as it was, but as a collection of components to be analyzed, dismantled, and reassembled to his own design. "Good evening, sir," Clara began, summoning a smile that felt like a foreign language on her lips. "Welcome to Aurelia. My name is Clara, and I'll be your server this evening. May I start you with some water?" "Still," he interrupted, his voice a low baritone, smooth but without a trace of warmth. "From a bottle opened at the table, and I'd like the pan-seared scallops. But first, tell me where they're from." Clara paused. It was a test, not just, are they fresh, but a question of provenance. "Of course, sir. They're diver scallops, harvested this morning from the Puget Sound, specifically near the San Juan Islands. We get them from a small, family-run boat called the Morning Star." The information surfaced effortlessly, before Aurelia, before her mother got sick, before she'd had to drop out of college. She'd worked weekends at a stall in the city's largest farmers' market. She knew the fishermen, the farmers, the cheesemakers. She knew their boats and their fields. It was knowledge she'd thought useless, a relic of a life that no longer existed, a flicker of something. Surprise? Respect? Passed through his cobalt eyes, so quickly she might have imagined it. "The Morning Star," he repeated softly. "Run by the Jensen brothers." "That's the one," Clara confirmed, a spark of genuine connection cutting through her professional facade. "Very well," he said, the mask of indifference snapping back into place. "And Clara?" "Yes, sir." "Don't hover. I'll signal if I need you." "Of course, sir," she murmured, retreating. From across the room, she could feel Tiffany's mocking gaze. She had passed the first ridiculous test. But the night was young. The meal proceeded in a tense, silent rhythm. Clara served him with quiet efficiency, anticipating his needs without being obtrusive. She refilled his water before it was empty, placed the silverware with the precision of a surgeon. He ate with a focused intensity, as if deconstructing each flavor. When she brought the check, he was already signing the credit card slip. He didn't look at her as he stood up, adjusted his cuffs, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the black leather folder on the table. Clara approached, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. A good tip, a great tip, could change everything. She opened the folder. The total was $247.50. And on the tip line, that single, vicious stroke. 0. The air rushed out of her lungs. It was worse than just leaving nothing. It was a statement, an insult, a deliberate negation of her existence, of her service, of the useless knowledge about the Jensen brothers' boat. "Told you so," Tiffany sang from behind her, peering over her shoulder. "The architect strikes again. All that work for nothing. That's just cruel." "He left." "Nothing," Clara whispered, the reality of it settling like a shroud. That should have been $50. $50 was a week of Eleanor's specialized nutritional supplements. "Miller, that table isn't going to clear itself," Davies barked from across the room. "We need to turn it over." Clara swallowed the knot of fury and despair in her throat. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run after him and demand to know why. But she was just a waitress. He was Julian Croft. She picked up the bus tub and began stacking the dishes, her movements sharp and angry. She lifted the heavy charger plate, and that's when she saw it. The folded cardstock. Her fingers, clumsy with shock, fumbled as she picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, architectural, all clean lines and sharp angles. "Clara, your attention to detail is wasted here. Prove it. Be at the Atlas Building, penthouse suite, at 11 p.m. Come alone." Clara stared at the words, her mind reeling. The Atlas Building was his building, the crown jewel of his empire. The penthouse was his private office. It sounded like a proposition, a dangerous, illicit invitation. "What's that?" Tiffany asked, her curiosity piqued. "Nothing," Clara said, her voice tight. She quickly crumpled the note, shoving it deep into her apron pocket, next to the brochure for Sunstone Meadows. "Just his trash." "Figures," Tiffany sneered, losing interest. "Hurry up, those software guys are calling for you." Clara cleared the rest of the table on autopilot, her thoughts a raging storm. This was insane. A billionaire summons a waitress to his penthouse at night? It was the setup for a cautionary tale, not a fairy tale. But then she remembered his eyes when she'd mentioned the morning star, the flicker of surprise, and his words on the note. "Your attention to detail is wasted here." He wasn't just being cruel with the $0 tip. He was making a point. The world of tips and servitude was worthless. This was something else. A door. She felt the crinkle of the brochure in her pocket. She thought of her mother, sitting in her small apartment, sometimes not even recognizing her own daughter. She looked at the clock on the wall. 10:15 p.m. Her shift ended in 45 minutes. She could go home, defeated. She could accept that Sunstone Meadows was a dream she couldn't afford. Or she could walk into the lion's den and find out what he really wanted. Clara untied her apron. She had spent her entire life playing it safe. Tonight, for Eleanor, she would gamble everything on a billionaire's cryptic challenge. The lobby of the Atlas Building was a cathedral of marble and steel, so quiet she could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. The air smelled of money and power. She approached the security desk, her worn waitress shoes feeling scandalous on the polished floor. "I'm here to see Mr. Croft," she said to the guard, a man built like a refrigerator. "He's expecting me." The guard eyed her simple coat and tired face with suspicion, but he spoke into his wrist microphone. A moment later, his expression shifted. "The private elevator at the end of the hall, ma'am. It will take you directly to the penthouse." The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, a smooth, swift climb that made her stomach lurch. When the doors opened, they didn't reveal a hallway, but the penthouse office itself. It was a vast, minimalist space, one entire wall a sheet of glass offering a god's-eye view of the city glittering below. Julian Croft stood by the window, his back to her, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't turn around. "You're 3 minutes late." "The 11:42 bus was running behind schedule," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He finally turned, his face unreadable in the dim light. He gestured to a large mahogany table in the center of the room. On it, laid out under a bright task light, were 5 large, rolled-up documents. "Sit." Clara sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. "Why am I here, Mr. Croft? If this is about the service, I can assure you—" "This has nothing to do with your service," he cut her off, walking toward the table. "Your service was impeccable. Your knowledge of scallop fishing, however, was unexpected. It showed an attention to detail, a retention of specific, non-essential information. A rare quality." He unrolled one of the documents. It was a complex architectural blueprint. "My company is built on details, Clara. Thousands of them. From the tensile strength of a steel beam to the precise hue of the paint in a lobby. For the past 6 months, someone on the inside has been altering those details. Small changes. A substitution of a slightly inferior material here, a miscalibration of a crucial measurement there. Each change is almost imperceptible on its own, small enough to be missed by our quality control. But together, they are a cancer, weakening the integrity of my structures, costing me millions in retrofitting, and more importantly, tarnishing my name." He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze intense. "My entire executive team, all with degrees from the best universities, has been unable to find the source. They look for massive fraud, for grand conspiracies. They don't see the hairline cracks in the foundation." He gestured to the 5 blueprints laid out on the table. "These are 5 renderings for the support columns of our new conservatory project. 4 of them are the final drafts from my lead architect. One of them is a forgery, submitted by the saboteur. It contains a single, fatal flaw in its specifications. Find it." Clara stared at the blueprints. "You want me, a waitress, to find an error in an architectural drawing?" "I want you to look at them the way you looked at my plate," he said. "I want you to notice the detail that everyone else misses. You have 1 hour. If you find nothing, my driver will take you home, and I will wire $5,000 to your account for your time. A tip, if you will. If you find the forgery, we will discuss a more permanent arrangement." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The deposit for Sunstone Meadows? He knew. Of course he knew. He hadn't just audited her service, he had audited her life. The thought was both terrifying and, strangely, liberating. The pretense was gone. "The clock is ticking," he said, turning back to the window. Clara took a deep breath and focused on the table. She didn't know anything about engineering, but she knew about art. She'd been an art history major, her focus on Renaissance printmaking, before she'd had to drop out. She knew how to look. She didn't look at the numbers or the structural lines first. She looked at the drawings as images. She looked at the quality of the paper. She ran her fingers lightly over the ink. She studied the signature of the architect, a man named Peterson, in the bottom corner of each page. 4 of the signatures were fluid, confident. The fifth was almost perfect, but there was a hesitation, a tiny, almost invisible pause in the upstroke of the P. It was the mark of someone copying, not creating. Her eyes narrowed. She moved from the signature to the drawing itself. She noticed the cross-hatching used for shading. In 4 of the drawings, the lines were consistently spaced, drawn with a steady hand. In the 5th drawing, the one with the hesitant signature, the cross-hatching was subtly different. The lines were just a fraction of a millimeter closer together, creating a slightly darker, heavier feel. It was a stylistic tick, a piece of the artist's unique handwriting. The forger had copied the design, but not the artist's hand. "It's this one," she said, her voice clear in the silent room. She placed her finger on the 5th blueprint. Julian Croft turned from the window, his expression skeptical. "And why do you say that?" "I don't know anything about the load-bearing capacity of steel," Clara said, standing up. "But I know how to look at a drawing, look at the signature. In these 4, the P in Peterson is a single continuous stroke. Here, there's a microscopic ink bleed at the top of the curve, where the pen paused for a fraction of a second. It's the mark of a forger, concentrating too hard." She pointed to the shading. "And here, the cross-hatching. Peterson's style is light, almost airy. This one is heavier, more dense. The forger copied the lines, but they couldn't copy his touch. They have a different artistic signature. The flaw isn't in the math, it's in the handwriting." Julian walked to the table and bent down, examining the blueprint under the light. He took a magnifying glass from a drawer and looked closely at the signature, then at the shading. The silence stretched, thick with tension. He straightened up slowly, placing the magnifying glass down. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, the cold, analytical mask was gone. In its place was a look of profound, unadulterated astonishment. "My God," he whispered, "you saw it. You actually saw it." He walked back to his desk and pulled out a checkbook. He started to write. "Mr. Croft," Clara began, "the 5,000 is more than enough." He ignored her, tore the check from the book with a sharp rip, and held it out. "It wasn't for 5,000. It was for 50,000. "This isn't a tip, Clara," he said, his voice now holding a new resonance, a vibration of respect. "This is a retainer. That was a test, and you passed in a way I never anticipated. I don't need another MBA from Stanford. I need you. I need your eyes." He leaned against his desk. "I want you to work for me. Not as an assistant, but as a consultant. An independent auditor of integrity. You'll have an office, full access to all project files, and a salary that will make your current life a distant memory. Your job will be to look for the forgeries, the hairline cracks, the things everyone else misses. Find the person who drew that blueprint, and you can write your own ticket." Clara looked at the check in her hand, then at the man before her. This was more than a job offer. It was a lifeline, a chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. "There's one condition," he added, his voice hardening slightly. "You will be loyal only to me. You report to no one else. You trust no one. In my world, everyone has an agenda. Your job is to find it." Clara thought of her mother. She thought of the condescending smirk on Tiffany's face. She thought of the crushing weight of her life and the sudden, dizzying possibility of flight. She looked at Julian Croft, the architect of this impossible moment. "When do I start?" she asked. The transition from the world of sticky tables and demanding customers to the sterile, air-conditioned corridors of Croft Enterprises was jarring. Clara felt like a ghost, haunting a world she didn't belong to. Her new office was on the 48th floor, a glass-walled space, with a view that made her feel perpetually dizzy. The $50,000 check had been deposited, and the first payment to Sunstone Meadows had been made. Eleanor would be moving in next week. For the first time in years, Clara could breathe. Julian had been true to his word. He introduced her to his senior staff in a brief, tense meeting as a special projects consultant, a title so vague it invited immediate suspicion. The person who eyed her with the most pointed curiosity was Evelyn Hayes, the company's chief operating officer. Evelyn was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile that never quite reached her intelligent, calculating eyes. She had been with the company since Julian's father ran it, a fixture of the old guard who had seamlessly transitioned into Julian's modern empire. She treated Clara with a cloying, maternal condescension. "Julian has always had a soft spot for a project," she'd said to Clara in the hallway after the meeting, her voice dripping with false warmth. "It's so wonderful that he's giving you this opportunity. If you need anything at all, dear, anything to help you get your bearings, my door is always open." It was a declaration of surveillance, not an offer of help. Clara knew her first task was to understand the landscape. She spent the first week doing nothing but reading. She requisitioned years of project files, supplier contracts, and expense reports. She wasn't looking for a smoking gun. She was looking for a pattern, a subtle deviation from the norm. She was looking for the corporate equivalent of a hesitant signature. The breakthrough came from the most mundane of sources, the supply requisitions for the architectural department. She noticed that for the past 6 months, there had been a significant increase in orders for a specific type of high-rag content vellum and a custom-blended brand of German ink. They were expensive, top-of-the-line materials, far too good for rough drafts. Yet, they never appeared on the final project invoices. They were being consumed by someone, but not for official work. It was a small detail, a tiny crack. She worked late most nights, long after the rest of the office had emptied out. Often, Julian would still be there, his own office light a solitary beacon at the end of the hall. He would sometimes stop by her doorway. "Anything?" he'd ask. "Just noise so far," she'd reply. They began to talk. He asked about her mother, and he listened, truly listened, as she described the heart-breaking, slow-motion erasure of the woman who had raised her. In return, he spoke of his father, a brilliant but demanding man, and the immense pressure of living up to his legacy. He told her about the betrayal that had made him so guarded. His first business partner, a college friend, had sold his designs to a competitor, nearly bankrupting him. "Trust is a currency I no longer trade in," he confessed one night, staring out at the city lights. "It's the only currency that matters," Clara had replied softly. She felt the ground shifting between them. He was no longer just her employer. He was becoming something else, a confidant, a partner. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Clara decided to follow the trail of the expensive paper. She cross-referenced the requisition dates with the security logs for the supply room. The access logs were digital, but she remembered Julian's lesson. Look for the physical record. She requested the old-fashioned paper sign-out sheets as well. That's where she found it. While the digital logs showed multiple architects accessing the room, the paper log, for a 3-week period when the digital system was being upgraded, showed only one signature for after-hours access: E. Hayes. Evelyn. It was circumstantial. Evelyn could argue she was getting supplies for her team. Clara needed more. She needed to connect Evelyn to the forgeries themselves. She remembered the stylistic tick, the heavy cross-hatching. She needed a sample of Evelyn's drawing style. She found it in the company archives, in a box of old projects from 20 years ago, back when Julian's father was in charge. Evelyn, then a junior project manager, had submitted a series of hand-drawn design proposals. Clara unrolled one of the old drawings, and there it was. The same heavy, dense cross-hatching. It was her artistic signature. It had been there all along, hidden in plain sight for 2 decades. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Evelyn wasn't just a saboteur. She was playing a long game, driven by a resentment that had festered for years. She was the one who felt her loyalty to the father had been overlooked by the son. She was the one who believed the company was rightfully hers. Just as Clara was connecting the final piece, her office phone rang. It was the front desk. "Ms. Miller, there are 2 gentlemen here from corporate security to see you. They say it's urgent." Clara's stomach turned to ice. Before she could respond, the door to her office opened. 2 stern-faced security guards walked in, followed by Evelyn Hayes. Evelyn's face was a mask of grave concern. Julian stood behind them, his face pale and rigid, his cobalt eyes shuttered and cold. He looked like the man she had first met in the restaurant, a stranger made of ice and stone. "Clara," Julian said, and his voice was devoid of all the warmth that had grown between them. It was the voice of a judge pronouncing a sentence. "I think you have some explaining to do." Evelyn stepped forward, holding a tablet. "We've been conducting a parallel investigation into the information leaks, Julian," she said, her voice smooth with feigned regret. "I'm afraid what we found is disappointing." She turned the tablet screen toward Clara. It showed a record of a recent wire transfer. $25,000 sent from a shell corporation owned by their biggest competitor, a company called Sterling Development, to a private bank account. Clara's bank account. "What is this?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "I've never seen this before." "We also traced a data transfer," Evelyn continued, her eyes boring into Clara. "A complete download of the schematics for our flagship project, the Phoenix Tower, sent from your office IP address to a server traced back to Sterling Development. It was sent at 2:17 a.m. this morning." "No," Clara gasped, looking at Julian, pleading with her eyes. "No, I would never." "You know I wouldn't." Julian's face was a granite cliff. The betrayal he had described, the one that had nearly ruined him years ago, was happening all over again, and he was seeing it through that old lens of pain. "I brought you into my world, Clara," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I trusted you. I gave you access to everything. And she used it to sell you out, just like you feared," Evelyn added softly, placing a comforting hand on Julian's arm. "She was a plant all along. The sick mother, the waitress story. It was all a brilliant act to prey on your sympathies, a classic long con. Every word was a perfectly aimed dagger." Clara looked at Julian's face and saw that the daggers were hitting their mark. He believed it. He believed them. "Julian, please," she begged, tears now streaming down her face. "She's framing me. Look at the files I have, the paper requisitions, the drawings from the archive." "Enough!" Julian's voice cracked like a whip. The sound echoed in the glass office. He looked at Clara, and the pain in his eyes was so profound it physically hurt to see. "I thought you were different." "I really did." He turned to the guards. "Escort Ms. Miller off the premises. Her access is revoked. Box up her personal belongings and have them sent to her." He wouldn't even look at her as the guards took her by the arms. "Julian!" she cried out as they pulled her toward the door. As she was being led away, she locked eyes with Evelyn. The COO's mask of concern had vanished. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. Evelyn gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A final, silent checkmate. Clara was deposited onto the pavement in front of the Atlas building, the glass tower now looking down on her like a monument to her own stupidity. The world had snapped back into its old, cruel shape. She had flown too close to the sun, and her wings had just melted. She had lost her job, her reputation, and the trust of the one person who had made her believe in second chances. And she knew, with a sickening certainty, that the money for her mother's care would stop. Evelyn would see to that. She had hit rock bottom before, but this time the fall was from the 48th floor. For 2 days, Clara existed in a fog of shock and grief. She stayed in her small apartment, the box of her office belongings sitting unopened in the corner like a tombstone. The first call came on the 3rd morning. It was the finance department from Sunstone Meadows, politely informing her that the automatic payment for her mother's next month had been cancelled. The clock was ticking again. Despair was a luxury she couldn't afford. Anger began to burn through the fog. Evelyn had played her perfectly, using Julian's own history against him. She had used a digital frame-up because digital evidence was clean, quick, and hard to refute. But Clara's own evidence wasn't digital. It was physical. It was paper and ink. It was sitting in that box. She ripped the box open. The security guards, in their haste, had packed everything on her desk, including the archival drawing and the copies of the supply logs. She laid them out on her coffee table. The evidence was all there, but it was her word against the COO of a billion-dollar corporation. Julian wouldn't listen to her. She needed irrefutable proof. Think, Clara. Think like he taught you to. Find the detail everyone else misses. The wire transfer. The data leak. Evelyn had to have a partner at the competitor, Sterling Development, and the frame-up was too perfect, too seamless. It meant Evelyn had access to Clara's personal information, her bank account details, her computer's IP address. How? Clara's mind flashed back to her first week, Evelyn's cloying offer of help. If you need anything at all, dear, to get your bearings. The company IT department had set up her computer, but it had been Evelyn's personal assistant who had helped her install the specific software suites she needed, including the one for connecting to the company's secure network from home. A back door, a keylogger. It had to be. But proving that was impossible now. She needed something else. Something physical. The ink. The custom-blended German ink. It was Evelyn's tell, her stylistic signature. If she could find a recent document, a contract, a memo, anything, signed by Evelyn with that same ink, and if that document was related to Sterling Development, it might be enough. She knew it was a long shot, but it was the only shot she had. She had to get back into the building. She remembered a name from the late-night security rosters she had once glanced at. A guard named Frank, an older man who always looked as tired as she felt. She'd shared a brief conversation with him one night about caring for an aging parent. It was a flimsy connection, but it was all she had. She took a bus downtown and waited across the street from the Atlas building until the evening shift change. When she saw Frank come out for a cigarette, she crossed the street. "Frank!" He looked at her, his eyes narrowed in recognition. "You're the one. Mr. Croft's consultant. I heard you were let go." "I was framed, Frank," she said, her voice low and urgent. "By Evelyn Hayes. She's destroying the company from the inside, and she's going to ruin Julian. I can prove it, but I need to get to the 48th floor, to the central filing archives, just for 10 minutes. She told him about her mother. She spoke of loyalty, of doing the right thing even when it's hard. Frank looked over his shoulder at the gleaming lobby. He had a mortgage. He had children in college, a life built on the quiet principle of not making waves. Helping her was an act of professional suicide. He took a final, deep drag from his cigarette, the ember a tiny, defiant star in the encroaching dusk. "The service elevator on the East Concourse," he said, his voice a low rumble, never once meeting her eyes. "The camera feed loops for a 90-second system reboot every night. At 1 a.m. sharp. The access door will be unlocked. You get one trip up, One trip down. If you're not standing on this pavement in 15 minutes, this conversation never happened. He crushed the cigarette under his heel and walked away, leaving Clara with the ghost of his kindness and the crushing weight of a 15-minute lifeline. At 12:58 a.m., the city's hum was a distant thrum. Clara was a shadow pressed against the cold granite of the Atlas Building's east entrance. As promised, the lock gave a soft, electronic click. She didn't hesitate. Inside, the air was sterile and still. The service elevator was a rattling metal cage, its ascent a noisy, mechanical protest against the building's otherwise silent majesty. Each floor number that lit up was a beat in the frantic drum solo of her heart. The 48th floor was a mausoleum of ambition. Moonlight filtered through the immense glass walls, painted long, spectral rectangles on the plush carpeting. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the daytime symphony of keyboards and ringing phones. It was the silence of a world she had briefly touched and been violently ejected from. She moved with a purpose, born of desperation, a thin piece of plastic from her wallet, slipping the latch on the Central Archives room door, a trick learned not from a movie, but from a long-forgotten summer job cleaning offices, where a locked supply closet was the only barrier to fresh paper towels. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of paper and time. Rows of filing cabinets stood like monoliths in the gloom. Using the weak beam of her phone's flashlight, she began her search. Her hands, which had once trembled with rage at a $0 tip, were now steady, surgical. She wasn't just looking for a file. She was excavating a truth. She bypassed the recent projects, the active accounts. She was looking for something dormant, something Evelyn would have assumed was forgotten. She found it in a drawer labeled Tertiary Land Acquisitions, Archived. It was a thick file concerning a waterfront redevelopment parcel from nearly a year ago, a joint bid between Croft Enterprises and Sterling Development that had soured and collapsed. It was the perfect place to hide a conversation, buried under layers of defunct legal jargon. Her fingers, numb with cold and adrenaline, leafed through the pages. And then she saw it. Tucked between two zoning variance reports was a preliminary memorandum of understanding. It was covered in annotations. At the bottom of the final page, two signatures, Julian Croft and Evelyn Hayes. Clara's light trembled as she focused on Evelyn's signature. The ink was a deep, lustrous black, a shade too rich for a standard office pen. And next to her signature, a small, almost casual note in her precise, angular script. JC is hesitant. We'll proceed with the alternate strategy we discussed. RS to be advised. RS Robert Sterling. This was more than collusion. This was a conspiracy documented in her own hand. The alternate strategy was clearly the campaign of sabotage, designed to make Julian's position untenable, to make him seem incompetent, and drive down the company's value for a hostile takeover. But it was the ink that held her. It was the same unique, heavy saturation from the forged blueprint. Her theory was no longer a theory. It was a tangible, damning fact. As she photographed the page, her light glinted off something else, a faint indentation on the back of the memo. She angled the phone, the light catching the ghost of words pressed through from a page that was no longer there. It was a list of names, architects, engineers, and at the bottom, one more. Clara Miller. Waitress, Aurelia. Mother, Eleanor Miller. Dementia. A wave of nausea washed over her. It wasn't just a frame-up. It was a calculated, psychological attack. Evelyn hadn't just found a scapegoat. She had studied her, dissected her life, and identified her precise point of leverage. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Her 15 minutes were vaporizing. She photographed the indentations, slipped the phone into her pocket, and melted back into the spectral silence of the 48th floor. The descent in the rattling elevator was a journey back from the underworld, her phone heavy with a truth that felt both explosive and utterly fragile. Back on the cold pavement, the city air was a shock to her lungs. The temptation to storm the gates, to leak the photos to the press, was immense. But that was Evelyn's game, loud, chaotic, destructive. Clara had learned from Julian. The most effective move was not a sledgehammer, it was a scalpel. A public accusation would be a spectacle. He would dismiss her as a disgruntled ex-employee. The evidence would be lost in the noise. She had to communicate with him in the only language he truly respected. The language of detail, of undeniable, self-evident proof. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and focused resolve. She didn't buy a new dress. She used the last of her money on a courier service. She printed high-resolution copies of 3 images: the forged blueprint of the conservatory column, the archival drawing from 20 years ago with Evelyn's youthful design, and the memorandum with her annotated signature. She placed them in a simple black portfolio. She included no letter, no explanation, no accusation. Only a small, cream-colored card. The same type of card he had left for her at the restaurant. On it, she wrote 5 words in clean, clear script. Find the artist's signature. She sent the package to his penthouse, not his office. A direct challenge to the man, not the CEO. Then, she waited. It was the ultimate gamble. She was betting everything not on his trust in her. That was broken, but on his trust in his own eyes, on the core principle he had built his entire empire upon, that the details never lie. Julian Croft saw the package sitting on the marble console table of his penthouse and nearly had his security team dispose of it. But the portfolio was sleek, anonymous, and the courier had specified it was for his hands only. Annoyed, he sliced it open. When he saw the 3 blueprints, his first reaction was a flash of hot anger, a taunt from his saboteur, a final insult from the woman who had betrayed him. He almost swept them into the trash, but the cream-colored card fluttered to the floor. He picked it up. Find the artist's signature. The words were a physical blow, an echo of a conversation that now seemed a lifetime ago. He was back in his office, the city glittering below, a young waitress with impossibly perceptive eyes pointing to a hesitation in an ink stroke. He had tested her, and she had passed in a way he never imagined. Now she was testing him. He spread the 3 documents on his vast mahogany table, the task light casting a pool of clinical white upon them. He saw it almost immediately, and the sight was so sickeningly obvious he felt a fool. It wasn't just the cross-hatching, it was the aggressive downward stroke on the letter T, the slight flourish on the number 7. The way the shading on a curved surface was always composed of dozens of short, straight lines rather than a smooth gradient. It was a fingerprint, an artistic DNA that was identical on the 20-year-old archival drawing and the forged blueprint. And there, on the memorandum of understanding, was the same DNA, condensed into the elegant, lethal form of Evelyn Hayes's signature. The digital evidence, the wire transfer, the IP logs, they were all smoke. A sophisticated illusion. This was ink and paper. This was pressure and intent. This was the hairline crack he had hired Clara to find, and he had been so blinded by the ghost of a past betrayal that he had allowed the real traitor to point him in the wrong direction. A chasm of self-recrimination opened beneath him. He hadn't just been wrong. He had been a willing pawn in his own destruction. He had punished the canary and promoted the cat. He didn't call security. He didn't call his lawyers. He picked up his private line and called Evelyn. "There's a discrepancy in the Sterling file I need you to look at. My penthouse. Now." She arrived 20 minutes later, a portrait of composed efficiency. "Julian, what's so urgent?" she began, her tone a perfect blend of concern and authority. He didn't speak. He simply gestured to the 3 documents laid out under the light. She walked over, a small frown of curiosity on her face. As her eyes took in the 3 images, her composure did not crack. It evaporated. For a single, unguarded second, he saw a flicker of pure, primal panic in her eyes before the mask of indignation slammed down. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "More of that girl's fabrications? Julian, I told you she was manipulative. I asked you a question once, Evelyn," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet, devoid of all heat. "When we first found the forgeries, I asked if you had any idea who might have the skill to replicate Peterson's design so perfectly. You told me no one. You said it had to be an outsider." He stepped closer to the table, his finger tracing the identical cross-hatching on the old drawing and the new forgery. "You lied. You knew of one person with the skill, because you've been practicing for 20 years. The color drained from her face. The fight went out of her. In the face of the quiet, irrefutable evidence, her bluster was useless. She was an architect of deceit whose own blueprint had just been exposed. "He never appreciated me," she whispered, the words brittle with decades of resentment. "Your father. He took my ideas, my loyalty, and he gave you the kingdom. I built this company as much as he did." "My father built it," Julian corrected, his voice like chipping ice. "You are trying to sell its ruins for scrap. Pack your desk. A severance package will be delivered to you. It will be generous on the condition that you sign a non-disclosure agreement, so airtight you won't be able to whisper the name Croft in your sleep. If you refuse, these documents go to the district attorney. Your choice." He turned his back on her, walking to the window and staring out at the city he had reshaped. He didn't watch her leave. He just listened to the soft click of the elevator doors, the sound of a 30-year career and a 30-year betrayal, ending not with a bang, but with a barely audible whisper. He stood there for a long time, the city lights blurring into a meaningless smear. He had won. He had excised the cancer. But the victory felt hollow, poisoned by the knowledge of his own catastrophic failure of judgment. He hadn't just failed the company. He had failed her. And the thought of the damage he had inflicted, the casual cruelty with which he had dismissed her, was a greater shame than any financial loss Evelyn could have ever engineered. He found her 2 days later, not in her apartment, but at Sunstone Meadows. She was sitting with her mother in a small, sun-drenched garden, reading aloud from a book of poetry. Eleanor was smiling, her gaze distant but peaceful. Clara's voice was soft, a gentle anchor in her mother's drifting world. He waited until the nurse came to take Eleanor inside. Clara looked up and saw him, and her face became a careful, neutral mask. There was no anger, no triumph, just a profound weariness. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice feeling clumsy and inadequate in the quiet garden. "But the word is meaningless." "Yes, it is," she said, not unkindly. She closed her book. "Words are easy, Julian. You build skyscrapers. You know that a foundation is made of steel and concrete, not promises." "I was wrong," he said, the admission costing him more than any deal he'd ever lost. "My past, it made me blind. She knew exactly what buttons to push, and I let her. I saw you through a lens of my own fear. I took your gift, this incredible clarity you have, and I weaponized it against you. There is no excuse for what I did." He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her posture, the intelligence in her eyes that he had almost extinguished. "I didn't come here to offer you your job back. I came to ask you to save my company. Again, not as a consultant, not as my secret weapon. Evelyn's position is open, Chief Operating Officer. But I don't want you to just take her job. I want you to redefine it. I want you to build a department from the ground up, dedicated to what you do, to integrity, to seeing the details, to build a foundation so strong that what she did can never happen again." Clara listened, her expression unreadable. This was it. The fairy tale ending, the vindication. But she felt a cold knot of caution in her stomach. "And what happens the next time your trust is tested, Julian? What happens the next time the evidence is digital and circumstantial? Who will you believe then? The system or the person?" It was the question he had been asking himself for 2 days. "The person," he said, his voice raw with conviction. "Because the system is only as good as the people who run it. I failed that test. I don't intend to fail it again." He took a breath. "This isn't just a job offer, Clara. It's a plea. I can't fix the culture I've allowed to fester on my own. I need a partner." She looked away, toward the window where her mother sat. She had gambled everything for that woman's peace of mind. Now she was being offered the keys to the kingdom. But she knew the kingdom was flawed, ruled by a brilliant, damaged king. To accept was not to win a prize. It was to take on the hardest job of her life. "If I come back," she said slowly, finally meeting his gaze, her eyes clear and steady, "I report to the board, not just to you. My division will have independent oversight, and my first act will be a full, transparent audit of the last 5 years. No secrets, no skeletons. We expose the cracks, all of them, and we fix them in the light of day. Those are my terms." It was an audacious demand, a fundamental restructuring of his power. A flicker of the old autocratic Julian surfaced in his eyes, and then it was gone, replaced by a deep, profound respect. "Accepted," he said without hesitation. 6 months later, the view from the 48th floor was different. It wasn't just Clara's perspective that had changed. The entire floor felt different. The hushed, fearful reverence was gone, replaced by a low hum of collaborative energy. Clara, now the executive vice president of strategy and integrity, had built her division not on fear, but on a culture of meticulous, open inquiry. Her team was a collection of brilliant misfits, a forensic accountant, a former art historian like herself, a data analyst who saw poetry in spreadsheets. They were the company's immune system. Her relationship with Julian had been painstakingly rebuilt, not on grand romantic gestures, but on late nights arguing over ethical sourcing contracts, on the shared satisfaction of rooting out a long-hidden inefficiency, on the quiet understanding that passed between them in a tense board meeting. The trust was regrowing, like a bone setting stronger in the place it was broken. One evening, he found her on the newly constructed terrace of the Atlas building, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gold. "I never properly thanked you for that night at Aurelia," he said, standing beside her. "You paid for my mother's care for the rest of her life, Julian," she said with a small smile. "I think we're even." "Not even close," he murmured. He reached into his pocket, not for a checkbook, but for a small, velvet box. He opened it. Inside wasn't a ring, but a single, exquisitely crafted fountain pen, its body made of dark, polished mahogany, its nib a sliver of gleaming platinum. "The ink is a custom blend," he said, We're calling it Clara's Blue. A bit on the nose, I know." She laughed, a genuine warm sound that carried on the evening breeze. She took the pen, its weight solid and balanced in her hand. It was a tool, a symbol, a promise. "It's not a gift, Clara," he said, his cobalt eyes serious, holding hers. "It's a reminder that one person, paying attention, can change the entire design." He gestured out at the sprawling city, at the skyline he had built, a monument to his vision and his ambition. "I spent my life building things out of steel and glass. But you're building something far more important inside these walls, something that will last." It wasn't a proposal, it wasn't a declaration of love. It was something deeper, a recognition, a partnership, forged in betrayal and rebuilt on a foundation of truth. Clara capped the pen, the soft click echoing in the twilight. She looked from the pen in her hand to the man beside her, and then out at the endless, glittering horizon. She was no longer just looking at the view. She was helping to draw the blueprint,